and welcome back to my channel, Modern Modiste. In today's video we're going to be making a shearling jacket. So I went and I made this entire shearling jacket, and then after it was completely finished I decided that the faux leather I'd used to make that jacket was a bit too lightweight for the look I was going for. I don't know why it takes me until the project is finished to realize things like this. So I went back to Joann's and I spent a little extra money. The one I first grabbed was on clearance for $9, and that low price of $9 per yard, it just distracted me. However, I did find this one that was a bit more heavyweight. Here's the jacket I went and traced for my pattern. You can go and find a moto jacket pattern online. I've seen at least one before, I know I have, but you need to size up because the shearling lining is going to take space out of your jacket. It's going to be super snug, so size up. Now let me get on to showing you how I created my pattern. As per usual, I traced around my jacket onto my paper. I used the sewing pin to mark my shoulder seam and the neckline onto the paper. Then I traced all that out and cut it out, adding 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now to create the moto jacket pattern, I traced this onto my paper, then added 4 inches to this top line here and 2 inches to the bottom line, and I connected those like so. Then I measured 2 inches from the center shoulder point and 6 inches from the center edge across the bottom and marked. I traced a line connecting these points, and this is going to be where my zipper goes. The zipper should actually be the same distance from the center line as the lapel added. My zipper line is a tiny bit more over, but I'm okay with that. I measured 3 inches from the bottom edge and marked in reminders to add seam allowance when cutting from the fabric. These pieces will be cut from the shearling Sherpa fabric, and these will be cut from the faux leather. Now for the back, I went and traced my initial pattern onto the paper again and made sure to exclude the seam allowance at the center, as that will be the fold line now. I added a higher neckline and began to draw my lines where I'd like my Sherpa lines to go in the back. I marked 3 inches again up from the bottom edge. Before I cut my back on these lines, I'm going to go and use this to cut out my lining back first. I should have did that with the front too, but I forgot, so I'm just going to have to tape that together and then use that to cut out the lining for the fronts. Okay, so for the right front side of my jacket, the zipper is going to be on the edge of my jacket and not here in the seam. So I just went and sewed these two sides together, and then I top stitched. I'm going to be using my Teflon foot that came with my machine to help me sew over the faux leather. The leather tends to not glide on the feed dogs with the normal presser foot, but the Teflon foot really helps to keep the leather moving smoothly. And now I need to figure out my pockets. I think I'm going to do a welt pocket. So I went and I cut this piece, which is 3 inches by 8 inches. And I went and drew on there the width of my welt, which is 1 inch tall and 6 inches wide. Now for the welt pocket, for this piece, I'm using a piece of the faux leather, but that's going to be a lot of bulk to sew through when I add my little piece that's going to go in the center of the welt, or the actual welt. So for this piece, maybe you should use a lighter weight lining fabric if you think that this is too heavy or will be too much for your machine to sew through. I don't want to use sewing pins, so I'm just tracing around this piece here to make sure when I go and sew around this rectangle, this is in the proper place. So now I'm going to go and sew around the rectangle. I went and cut this piece of my shearling fabric, and this is 9 inches by 5 inches. Now I didn't want to use pins for this project, but for this I may have to, just to make sure everything is lined up properly. But I'm going to fold this in half, and it's going to go behind the opening that we just created. This folded edge is going to face toward the armhole of the jacket. I'm going to sew along here first. I pinned this piece to my opening and then stitched around the entire opening, stitching this piece in place. To finish the pocket, this is going to be my pocket lining. I cut it 8 by 13. You can cut yours longer for a deeper pocket. I'm going to sew this lining to the bottom edge of my pocket welt like this, and then fold it up like so to match the top edge of the faux leather piece and stitch these 3 sides closed. Then I'm going to sew the 2 stripper pieces together and sew that onto the bottom edge of the faux leather, right sides facing, and sew 1/2 of the zipper using my zipper foot to the edge of this piece, right sides facing like this. Okay, so now we need to do this side, and the only difference between the side I'm doing now and the side I did already is there's going to be a zipper in this seam right here. So I'm going to go and sew my shearling material to each side first before I attach these. Before you go and attach this piece here, you want to zip it up and make sure that everything is lined up and it's looking really good. So I'm going to go and attach this to this piece. All I have to do now is go add the pocket here, and then I'm going to get onto the back of my jacket. Now I have all the pieces of my back cut out, and I'm going to add my Sherpa material to it. I think I'm just going to go and cut 1 inch from here, or 2 inches, and I'm going to fold it like this, and I'm going to sew it in the seams. So let's go and try that and see how that looks. I cut a strip of my Sherpa 2 inches wide and then cut a piece for this seam. I sewed it to this edge of my back piece, right sides facing, and then folded the Sherpa material in half and sandwiched it between this back piece here. I sewed all these together and this was my result. Then I proceeded to do the same exact thing with the other seam. It's working so far, so I'm going to go and add a piece in between this seam here and in between this seam here. Okay, now I'm going to do one in this seam here. I added this piece the same exact way I added the first piece. I sewed it to this bottom half, folded it in half, sandwiched it between the top back piece, and sewed it all together. I just broke a needle. I'm going to go and put the strongest, toughest needle I have in my needle stash and hopefully get through this seam. After that, I went and sewed my fronts to the back at the shoulders, right sides facing. I still need to go and add the shearling to the bottom of the back. I forgot to do that, but look at this. For the sleeve pattern, I traced around my sleeve and used my sewing pin to mark the shoulder curve of the sleeve onto my paper. Once I had my sleeve all traced, it was time to add my lines where I wanted my Sherpa material to go. These pieces are from the back of my jacket pattern. I'm measuring down from the shoulder edge down to here where I added my Sherpa line at the yoke, and using that measurement to mark from the center top point of my sleeve down the same amount so that that Sherpa line lines up with the Sherpa line on the back of my jacket. I'm going to go and add seam allowance and cut this from my Sherpa for my lining before cutting on the lines and cutting out my faux leather pieces. I cut 4 of the Sherpa bottom parts of the sleeve, 2 for the lining and 2 for the outer jacket. And then I cut a few 2-inch wide strips of the Sherpa material for the Sherpa lines in my sleeves. I sewed my Sherpa fabric into the sleeve seams the same exact way I did on the back of my jacket. Then I sewed a strip of the Sherpa material to the curved edge of my sleeve. And then I folded the Sherpa strip in half and sewed it in place. I sewed the bottom Sherpa piece to the bottom edge of my sleeve, and now I'm going to go and pin this sleeve to the armhole of my jacket and sew it on. Then close the sides of my jacket sewing from the armpit down the sides and from the armpit down the sleeves. And this is how we're looking so far. For the second jacket, I decided that I would add my Sherpa bottom after I assembled the jacket with my zipper not extending into the Sherpa bottom, and this is how it was looking at this step. I went and sewed the two ends of my Sherpa piece together and then sewed it to the bottom of my sleeve right sides facing. And then I went and sewed my bottom Sherpa pieces together for this jacket, which by the way I cut the front Sherpa pieces in one piece each instead of the two I did for the first jacket. And I pinned this to the bottom of my jacket and sewed it on right sides facing. So at this point I have this jacket all finished. And I can already see the huge difference between this material and this material. Like, this material was made to be a jacket, and thanks to adding the shearling cuffs and the shearling bottom after I already assembled the jacket, everything is even on the sides and at the sides of the sleeves, unlike this jacket where things are not perfectly lined up. See? You know, sometimes you gotta do things twice because then you figure out the correct way to do it. So, I added the collar to this jacket and I do not like this collar. I mean, it's not bad, I just don't like it. So I'm going to be taking a different approach. I'm going to be using the collar from a pattern. Let me go get it. This McCall's pattern. Now, the neckline on the actual jacket is supposed to line up with the collar, so I used my tape measure to measure the bottom edge of my collar and then measured the neckline of my jacket and found the collar size that corresponded with the neckline measurement. Then I used my tracing wheel to trace half the collar pattern onto my tracing paper like this. I cut one out of my faux leather and one from my Sherpa material. Then I sewed these two together right sides facing along the sides and top edge. Trimmed off the excess at the corners and turned it right side out. I switched the top thread in my sewing machine to the white thread and top stitched around the edge, then pinned the collar to my jacket and sewed it on. So now I'm going to go and attach this to the outer jacket. I pinned my lining to the outer jacket right sides facing along the neckline and the bottom edge and sewed the two together. To attach the lining and outer jacket sleeves, I pinned the sleeve opening of the lining sleeve and outer jacket sleeve together like so and sewed them together. With the jacket inside out, I'm going to clip together the side along the zipper and along the other side as well, only I'm going to leave an opening over there because that's how I'm going to pull the jacket right side out. I'm going to pull everything right side out and then I'm going to use my clips again to close this side that was left open, and I'm going to top stitch. I didn't like how the bottom Sherpa edge had no structure, so I went and added a piece of my lighter weight faux leather in there just to give it some structure. You can use interface and I didn't have any, so I used the faux leather and that worked for me. And then I hand sewed the top of the sleeves Sherpa cuff and the lining Sherpa cuff together to prevent the lining Sherpa from coming out like this. And that completes this project.